What are some of the things, Sammy, that you have thought about kind of just around food?
In the beginning is that it's not often thought about the emotional side of weaning. There is a huge emotional component when it comes to weaning, and whether it's, because like in my case, there's a lot of nerves around it, like how's it going to go, with my line of work. So yeah, I think that's like a question for Jenny, is how to just manage the emotions.
Food is so deeply intertwined and entrenched in the relationship. It's connection, it's relationship between you and your child. We also want to normalize for parents that frustration in the process is a very typical thing that they experience. If we can take the pressure of not thinking about food in those early periods as being so critical to the nutrition and weight gain and whatnot, but actually if we change perspective and see those first few weeks and months as setting the tone for food, for developing tolerance and capacity and diversity in taste buds, and a fun playfulness around eating.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Let's Talk Baby. And as we continue in our Weaning series, I love these ones where I'm joined by both our co-hosts. So we've got Dr. Jenny Rose. Hi, Jenny.
Hello, Kath.
It's always nice to see you, even if we don't get to meet in person often. At least we get to do these together, which is fun.
So lovely. It's a great way for us to catch up. I love it.
Absolutely. And then, hi, Sammy, our other co-host and mom of Kyla, so who's the star of this whole series. Hi, Sammy.
Hi, Kath. Hi, Jenny.
So today we are talking about a really important topic, and it's probably a topic not often spoken about in the context of weaning, and that is just around the emotional health in weaning and developing an emotionally healthy relationship with food. And as parents on the weaning journey, that should be one of the things and one of the goals that we would want to encourage when you are starting the weaning journey. And I know, with Kyla, as we have started the journey and started the feeding journey with her, what are some of the things, Sammy, that you have thought about kind of just around food? And maybe there's some things you'd like to also just kind of bounce off Jenny, since you've got her here, just with regards to just bringing in that healthy emotion around feeding, because we know that that is a ground that could be fraught with a lot of different feelings and, challenges. Just off the top of your head, what are some of the things that you've already thought about in your early process of weaning her?
Yeah, I think, when having started this journey now, it's something like you said in the beginning, is that it's not often thought about the emotional side of weaning. And that comes in with, my feelings towards weaning, and then also, having gone back to work, just in terms of how I'm doing in the day emotionally. So obviously if it's been a busy day and I come back and I want to do a solid meal with Kyla, and I'm now either frustrated because of something at work or, just exhausted and just really not feeling the sort of impact that my mood and my emotions has on this whole the whole meal time, and how it can really actually impact how Kyla does during that meal time. And I think that, there is a huge emotional component when it comes to weaning, and whether it's, because like in my case, there's a lot of nerves around it, like how's it going to go, with my line of work. I know what she should be doing. I know the sort of red flags, and in the back of my mind, I keep thinking about that. So yeah, I think that's like a question for Jenny, is how to just manage the emotions around weaning, and especially those like negative emotions. Like if I've had a bad day, or if I'm super anxious, how not to let Kyla feed off of that, and how not to let it impact our journey. By bringing it into that space.
Yeah. It's such an important thing, Sammy, because I think we don't often even think about this, and yet it's such a big factor in actually determining our kids' eating journey. If we think about weaning, it's their first encounter with food, and we're really setting the stage for eating habits for a lifetime. And while on the one hand, that might seem very overwhelming and scary, and obviously there's always ways to shift things along the way, but it's also quite reassuring because it allows us to have a lot more control, I think, in that journey and that pathway of our kids' lives, and being intentional. We always think about conscious parenting, intentional parenting. It flows over to all things, even nutrition and food. How are we going to be intentional about the way food unfolds in our homes? And, I think the mistake that we make is we often just see food as a chore or an event, a kind of thing to tick. So we see it as a meal. We need to get the food into the child, and we tick that the child has got a full tummy, and we've done that. And we forget how much is intertwined emotionally, how much our emotional standpoint influences them. And so I think even just coming into the feeding scenario, having a brief moment of reflection to go, this isn't just about food. There's at the forefront, this is about the relationship. Food is so deeply intertwined and entrenched in the relationship. It's connection, it's relationship between you and your child. And so I come in with that knowledge, knowing that this is about relationship, but also knowing that my emotional state is going to impact how this unfolds. And so instead of just coming in and not really giving it much thought, and then you blink and you mid-feeding and you are irritated and flustered and you haven't actually figured out why, to just slow down a little bit. And I often use the word reset with moms, these moments in the day where we need to just catch ourselves and reset ourselves as we enter into a scenario. And so, it can be as simple as just walking into the kitchen before you're going to start the feeding sort of process and resetting to say, I might have had a rough day, I'm feeling frustrated and overwhelmed, but I'm going to find a way to regulate myself. And that might be with different thoughts and strategies that you have developed yourself. But I'm going to reset so that when I engage in this feeding process, I'm coming from a much more regulated and calm space, because my emotional state, without a doubt, is going to influence my child and then ultimately influence their eating or feeding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that reset moment. And I think it's a principle to use, obviously, in all aspects of parenting, as you said, but we don't often think about it in the food moment. And before we launch into, even in the moment, say where you are feeding and the child suddenly decides this is not like yesterday, Kyla loved her butternuts, and then today she just looks disinterested in it. And in that moment, you want to go, what has gone on? What have I done wrong? You're becoming a fussy eater, and you start to panic to actually go away. Let's just reset. It's okay. This is going to happen. It's all right. Just rationally process it. So I suppose you're going to be resetting a few times during the feeding process instead of being reactive to that.
And I think it's also like touching on that, Kath, it's also so important that if you just feel like this is just not the time, and see that you're just getting more and more frustrated or more and more panicked, it's okay. Done our meal time or our practice, and even though today it might have been 5 minutes compared to yesterday was 15 minutes, if I think there's no point in trying to push it and try and continue, and both you and your child land up getting in a bit of a state or whatever the case may be. There's nothing wrong with just saying, okay, let's call this sort of the session and let's go play or do something a bit different.
And maybe sorry, Kath, just jumping in there. I think We also want to normalize for parents that frustration in the process is a very typical thing that they experience. I think a lot of the time we're very quick to judge ourselves. We know we had done many podcasts about mom guilt and what that looks like. We're very quick to say this should be this wonderful experience and it should be easy, and why is this not working, and am I doing something wrong? And I just want to normalize the frustration as well. I think one of the things that I could very much identify as my own frustration or trigger was when I spend hours working on this delicious meal that I have really put so much effort into, and I know that it's great, and yet no one eats it. And I had a real laugh the other day because I ended up running late at work. And so I had planned this whole meal, and then my husband had to start it, and they did not appreciate his efforts. And he was like, I finally understand why you get so cross when you've spent hours cooking something and then no one actually wants to eat it, or it doesn't get delivered as you're expecting. But I think just to realize that that's also part of the process. And I know we are going to have many conversations about weaning, and there's many factors that impact that, like their emotional state, consistency differences on a different day. Food might taste a little bit different. So I think just holding in mind that it is also normal for you to show up with different emotions on every day. And there are times where you'll absolutely love the feeding journey, but there are days where it will frustrate you, where you might feel like you don't have capacity. And just as Sammy has said, there are times where it's okay if you choose to opt for a different alternative to the one that you had planned, or if you decide to end a little bit earlier. So I think just being attuned to what you're feeling and responding, with flexibility is really such an important part.
Yeah, and then I think just from a dietetic point of view, I want to give moms total permission that they can even leave feeding out in total. Especially in the beginning, and especially in the early few months, because milk is the primary food source. And if the baby is having a rough day and you're having a rough day, or you just having a rough day, or just haven't got it together, or just haven't managed to get to the shop, it's not the end of the world. They're not relying on this for a huge amount of nutrition in the beginning, especially, where Kyla's at the moment. She's in the first kind of 1 to 2 months of weaning is just learning how to navigate food. So it really is not like once you've started, that's it, you kind of bound to it forever. It is really just remembering to, like you say, listen, hear yourself, figure it out, and just be kind to that journey and that. Because ultimately, we want to make the experience pleasant for baby, but we also want it to be pleasant for you as the parent feeding, because then you're also going to be more motivated to keep feeding.
Yeah, and I want to underscore that, Kath. I think that is so important for moms just really to hear. I think just that what in essence we're saying is that those first few weeks and months of feeding are not the nutritional value for a child. Actually, then, if we can take the pressure of not thinking about food in those early periods as being so critical to the nutrition and weight gain and whatnot, but actually if we change perspective and see those first few weeks and months as setting the tone for food, for developing tolerance and capacity and diversity in taste buds, and a fun playfulness around eating and connection and relationship, that actually far outweighs the nutritional value in those first few sort of time periods.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So mommies, you have our permission. Do you hear that loud and clear? Your baby will not starve because you are on this journey. Sammy, just to kind of as just the last mention, which I think is really important, is just outside pressure that can affect your emotion. And you mentioned a bit of anxiety, like towards the feeding. And I think there are probably two areas, and this is actually deserves a whole podcast on their own, but just to kind of just get Jenny's take on it and just your take on it, just from social media, like judging where you are in your weaning journey with social media, and then also like family members who may have a baby similar age to yours, or had a baby similar age to yours, and obviously the child's grown up. And have you experienced that yet, or is it still too early on?
I have. I think that, social media can be such a beautiful thing, but it can also be so dangerous, especially from a mental health standpoint and an emotional standpoint, because we can't help but compare. And you see another mom's post their little one's weaning journey, and you think to yourself, sure, like, I'm not anywhere near there, and their child is maybe like only a month ahead or the same age or a week's difference. And there's a lot of comparison that happens, and I think it's in all the sort of realms of childcare and having a baby. But when I think it's especially sensitive when it comes to feeding, because I think, as a mom and as a parent, you want to nurture your child and nourish your child. And I think, like, we'll touch on it as we go on, but that relationship with food, it's you just want to be able to do it right. And when you are comparing, it can really affect a person, I think, when you're comparing, whether it's somebody you don't know on social media and even family members. So, I've got 3 little nephews, and they're a little bit older than Kyla, and it's you hear about their weaning journey, and I think of where Kyla is, and you can't help but think, okay, but what happened when that little one was this age? And then at the same time you're also getting advice, and we did this, and or even just like a little bit of judgment, like, oh, why is Kyla spitting the food out, or she doesn't look like she's enjoying it. So there's a lot of noise around social media, around family, around friends, and it can be it can have a negative impact on mental health, especially with regards to what you're doing with your child. And it can make you kind of think, oh, well, am I doing this right, or are we on the right track, or is there something wrong? Which is what you touched on. In the beginning days, it's all just about experience and about exposure. And here we're thinking that, oh goodness, I'm not on the right track, or my baby's behind, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I think Jenny can also just touch on just the negative impact of social media and family opinions and pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so similar to so many conversations around parenthood, and the judgment that we feel we receive from the outside. And I think sometimes the judgment we have of ourselves when we look on social media. And I think it's such a dangerous place, because I think especially moms are so vulnerable in that postpartum period. It's such a vulnerable period. You have had this life-changing experience that no matter what you do, you are not prepared for, because it will turn your life upside down in wonderful ways, but in so many different ways. And then we look to the outside world, and it just feels very different perhaps to what's going on in our own homes. And that's where we set ourselves up for not for any success, really. We're setting ourselves up for failure, because it just leads to a very difficult spiral of negative self-thoughts, of critique against oneself. It impacts your relationship with your child. And so, we often say drowning out that outside noise is so important. And I think recognizing when that tipping point comes. So there's definitely positivity, and I'm going to follow certain pages that give me great recipes and show me, great tips on how to encourage the process. But I need to be able to recognize the tipping point for myself, where that goes into me feeling bad about the way I'm doing it, and not having this beautifully presented meal and maybe buying one ready-made from a certain place on one day, or perhaps using a non-kid-friendly spoon and not the one that I should be using, and that there's grace for those moments. And so we have to recognize that it goes from helpful to hindering, and catching yourself in that.
That's so helpful. Yeah, and I think, I'm just, as you're talking and as you both are chatting, I'm thinking of more and more areas where negative emotions could come into feeding, but obviously we don't have time to do that and unpack that today. But I think it's going to be a conversation we're going to need to have continually on this Weaning series. And as Kyla is going more and more into the kind of mechanisms of eating and getting more engrossed in her feeding, and that we're definitely going to be unpacking them. But I think just for our audience today, I think for me, the big take-home messages are, number one, just take time to reset. If you're feeling anxious, feeling rushed, there's negative emotions around feeding time, resets. And then that might look like maybe skipping the meal, having a shorter meal, waiting a little bit, delaying the meal, and whatever that looks like for you, there's no perfect way to do it. And then I think the other thing is just be kind to yourself. Realize that outside perfection is not necessarily what it seems. I always say social media doesn't always show you the real story. And so be careful what you are judging yourself and your baby and this weaning journey against. And ultimately, the best is what's going to work best for your baby. And that's going to be the happy space. And maybe choose, as I always say, 1 or 2 sound voices that you can bounce all the information coming in off, because I think that is most helpful to be able to have a filter for those noises that are going to be there. You can't get away from them. And then I love, and just to end with what you said, is it helping you or is it hindering you? And the minute something starts hindering you, you want to kind of remove it, just say it's done. I'm not going to go there anymore, and just focus on what is helping you. So thank you so much. Thank you, Sammy, for just your vulnerability, because you obviously here sharing the true life journey of Kyla. So we really do appreciate that, because it makes it so relatable.
Yeah.
And Jenny, as always, just your words of wisdom and also your stories. I'm sure your husband will have to get guts to attempt another mission.
Exactly.
And everyone watching, we thank you so much for watching, and we hope you are finding this series helpful, and we look forward to the next one.